Well, 35 years ago on this day, depending on your age, there was a sense of rising anticipation and excitement because Brisbane and I guess Queensland, really, the whole of the country was just a couple of days away from the opening of an event that would profoundly change the city of Brisbane and the state of Queensland forever. They say that Brisbane particularly was never the same after Expo 88. The event, which went for 6 months and that turned what had been a dreary industrial wasteland on the south bank of the Brisbane River, it changed that into a international playground when the World Fair came to town. It changed the city, its people. It changed the way the world viewed us and the way that we viewed the world forever. Her Majesty the Queen officially opened Expo 88, the World Fair, 35 years ago this Sunday evening. But I doubt very much that Ric Birch was thinking too much about all of that big picture stuff at the time. I would imagine that as Director of Entertainment for the 6-month-long event and just days away from the opening ceremony, I would imagine his mind was on things a lot more closer to hand, and I would imagine it was a fairly tense time. Let's find out. He joins me now. Ric Birch, good morning and welcome. Such a pleasure to talk to you this morning.
Hello, David. Nice to hear your voice.
It is great to chat. I must admit, I have such a fondness and such great memories of Expo 88. But I must admit I'm a bit embarrassed and I can't recall why now. I think I probably thought that it was going to be too crowded, that I didn't go to the opening ceremony. I think my first brush with Expo was at the James Taylor concert on the River Stage, which was either the following night or the following weekend. But can I ask you, if you go back to today, 35 years ago, a few days out, what were you feeling at the time? Was it high tension?
Well, it wasn't exactly high tension, but we'd had a lot of rain. The month of April had been almost continuous rain, and we had to get paint drying and we had to get rehearsals underway. And it made that we had tarpaulins over everything in order to proceed. And the opening, which unfortunately you missed, started downtown where we had a marching band, the Expo City Marching Band, and Marcy, who was the baton twirler, led a parade from downtown across the bridge and onto the Expo site. On the bridge, we had a collection of national flags made from balloons, which got released as Marcy and the band went past. And that was what I was actually worried about a couple of days out, whether the balloons would all be blown off before the opening ceremony. And then waiting on the site, we had a 2,000-piece symphony orchestra made up of school and university music graduates, and they lined the parade route. Then we had RAF Hercules flying over, dropping fireworks and balloons and helicopters with smoke. It was quite an opening ceremony. It was a pity you missed it.
I know. As I say, I'm embarrassed to have missed it now. But I was there for the closing ceremony, which was an incredibly brilliant thing to see and emotional, both for what was going on the stage, but also the emotion of the crowd. I distinctly remember watching in both admiration and horror as some person around about my age, I think, climbed one of the flagpoles to souvenir one of the flags at the entrance to the site, which sounds like an act of vandalism, but it really wasn't. It was an act of, this meant so much to us that we must grab any piece of it that we can hold close forever. That was the impression I got, and it was just a fantastic day. But the event, how long before Expo started were you appointed to the role of entertainment director for the event?
About 3 years. I think I came up here in January 85.
Was that more pressure? I mean, up until then, and I guess this is what got you that particular job, was your fantastic creation of the opening and closing ceremonies of the 1982 Commonwealth Games in Brisbane. And opinion is still divided, I think, among Brisbaneites as to which event made the city, more profoundly, the Commonwealth Games or Expo. I'd say it was probably a combination of the two. But that was two events, whereas Expo was an opening and closing ceremony plus all that went in between in terms of entertainment. Did you feel at any stage that, my God, I've bitten off more than I can chew?
Well, no. I don't wish to be humble here, Dave.
No, nor should you be.
No, I'd actually been a TV producer and director with the ABC for about 16 years, and I was executive producer of entertainment when the Com Games came along, and we pitched for that. The ABC was the host broadcaster, but the organising committee for the Com Games approached, I think there were 3 or 4 different creative groups, and I led the pitch for the ABC, and we got the gig. After that, I went to Los Angeles, and I was director of production for the LA 84 Olympics, and I came from that back to Australia to do Expo.
So Expo was almost, dare I say, a step down, I suppose, in terms of pressure. You had fried bigger fish before then, obviously.
Well, no, only in terms of media. I mean, the Olympic opening ceremonies are obviously a very big deal because they go out live to billions of people, whereas Expo was a static event. But Expo probably is my fondest memory. I've worked now on seven different Olympics doing the opening closing. But Expo's got a very special place, partly because it went for 6 months, so we had a chance to relax and get into it. Whereas for an Olympic ceremony, the moment you've done it, it's over and gets packed up and there's very little left. But Expo, it changed the lives not just of Brisbane people, but of many of the people who worked on entertainment, a lot of whom have gone on to other areas of entertainment all over the world. I come across them from time to time in different countries.
And tell me about that, because I guess, again, to the layman's from the layman's perspective, they might have seen, look, the opening ceremony, that was big and high pressure because there was every dignitary under the sun there, including Her Majesty the Queen. The closing ceremony, you don't want to stuff that up. I guess people might have seen from the outside that they were the 2 big things, but throughout 6 months, entertainment was such a memorable part of Expo. The street parade, the follies, the swimming, the diving, the concerts on the stage. Which did you, ahead of time, what out of all of that did you see as being your biggest challenge? Were there things that came up that you saw as a challenge that we might not even think of?
Well, in fact, my brief from Bob Minikin, who was the general manager of Expo, Bob came over to Los Angeles and asked me there whether I'd be interested in coming back to do Expo, which I was very interested in. But Bob said at the time that their audience research had shown that international attendance was not going to be significant. They'd worked out that people around the world were not going to travel to Brisbane to attend an Expo as their first reason for travel. If they were already in Australia, it was possible that they would come, but, it wasn't a destination thing. But what they also found out was that it was a destination event for Australian populations, but more so for the Brisbane and Gold Coast population. So Bob said the main thing we need to do is to make sure people come back on repeat visits. And he thought that entertainment was the way to do that. And it ended up being very successful at repeat visits. And a lot of the post-Expo research showed that entertainment was a major component for attracting people to come back more than once.
Thinking of some of the major acts that performed on the Expo stage, the River stage, over those 6 months, it was just a who's who. I guess both artists who were touring at the time and in some cases people who came out perhaps specifically for that, but then toured on the strength of that. But did you have a list of absolute must-gets, beforehand, or was that an evolving process?
Well, it had to evolve because 3 years out, we didn't know who'd be available and who'd be topical. Yeah. But as we got closer, Richard Eastway was our booker, and he had a concert company already in place. So he was able to book acts, and then they could do tours afterwards. But we got Joe Cocker. Actually, the most dangerous concert was Julio Iglesias, because there were blue-haired ladies in the audience who were throwing underwear at Julio, and they were ruthless. Our security guys were very nervous around the blue-haired ladies who were big fans of Julio.
You don't want to mess with them. Incredible.
They were dangerous. Oh, and there was another little old lady, and this was for the British National Day. The river stage was the location for all the national days of the countries that were exhibiting. And on the British UK Day, on the grass in front of the river stage, there was a little old lady who was knitting, and one of our techs was a little bit suspicious because she sat there in the sun for a long time, and he walked past and looked down, and she had a handgun in her handbag. So he immediately alerted security, and in fact we found out she was from MI5, and she was there to make sure that Margaret Thatcher didn't run into any Julio Iglesias fans on the night for the UK event.
Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely true.
There you go. Yeah, that shatters any illusion that we had that all MI5 agents looked anything like James Bond.
She might not have made the audition, I think.
No, perhaps not. Were there artists that you wanted to get and held out hope of getting but just weren't able to snavel? Are there any stories of the ones that got away?
No, not really, David. We were able to get the ones who were available, willing and able, but we weren't really a rock venue.
No,
no,
of course not.
The River Stage was one of 9 different entertainment venues, and we always programmed it to the highest level that we could. But it seems wrong to say it didn't matter. Of course, it all mattered, but there were many things going on all the time. And even when we had high-profile acts done at the River Stage, the rest of the entertainment venues kept on going, and there were still, 100,000 people in other places on the site every time there was a concert. I think our maximum was the closing night, where we had 350,000 people on site when Julie Anthony and the Seekers sang "The Carnival is Over," and we all burst into tears.
Absolutely. What a magic night that was. It was just absolutely incredible. You're right. I mean, we shouldn't dwell on just one venue because the whole thing was so much bigger than that. I distinctly remember one of the joys was just stumbling across concerts and smaller performances that you didn't know was, unless you'd done your homework, and as an 18-year-old kid, I didn't do my homework, but stumbled across a fantastic concert with James Morrison, the trumpeter, and I think it would have been performing with, and the name of the jazz singer escapes me now, but it was a wonderful show, and I think there was only probably about 100 people in the audience, just this tiny little sort of outdoor amphitheatre somewhere in between 2 pavilions, and it was one of the best shows I think I've seen in to this day, a concert of that calibre in that intimate an atmosphere. What in terms of that entertainment, what do you still get feedback from that didn't have anything to do with the main stage, other aspects of entertainment that you programmed on the site? What are the things that you achieved that you're most proud of because people still talk about them to this day?
Well, one of the big surprises was Friday night at the Piazza, which held about 3,000 people. You would have seen James at the amphitheatre, which, as you say, was a smaller, much more intimate venue with only 200-300 seats. But the Piazza was a big space with 3,000. And we found out David Hamilton, who was the producer in charge of the Piazza, came up with the idea of ballroom dancing. This is a long time before Strictly or anything else. And it turned out that Friday night was a great night for ballroom dancing, and people showed up and danced on the Piazza. But then he came up with wood chop, because I've always loved wood chop, and it's a Queensland thing as well.
Yeah.
So I asked David if there was any way he could hold a wood chop competition in the Piazza, and he programmed it for Friday night, and it turned out that wood chop followed by ballroom dancing was by far the most popular event in Expo history.
Were you surprised?
I was totally shocked. But I was fairly busy with the Aquacade. The Aquacade was the only event on site that I actually personally got involved with creatively and produced the Aquacade, and it ran 5 times a day.
Yes.
And we had about 24 synchronized swimmers and about 16 divers from memory, and a couple of marriages. So obviously it was a good thing.
Who were some of those? You mentioned earlier that there are people who had gone on to fantastic careers around the world who pretty much had their debut as a professional performer at Expo. What are some of the examples of that?
Well, not so much performers as the backstage crew guys.
Okay.
I see them showing up.
Yep.
John Raymond, who is our tech director, has been to Shanghai with me. We did a show there. He lit the Sydney Olympics in 2000. Other audio, it's behind the scenes people, but the Australian experience at Expo has given them terrific credentials to go on to work internationally on a lot of other big events like Expos, like Olympic Games, and also concerts. Bruce Jackson, who unfortunately is the late Bruce Jackson, went to America when he was 25 and became Elvis's sound engineer. Bruce went on then to be one of the world's leading sound engineers. He worked in Sydney and advised us on Expo. So, we had access to a lot of great people.
That's brilliant. If you've just come in, by the way, it's 9:23. My name's David Iliff. Having a chat to Ric Birch this morning. Ric, I don't want to take up too much of your time. You've been very generous with your time. But were you ever approached, or were you ever tempted, if that approach came, to fill a similar role in subsequent Expos? Because I think for a lot of people, they've lost track of the fact that Expos still happen, I believe, every, whatever it is, 4 years or so in some city around the world. Have you ever been approached to be involved again?
Well, yeah, I did the opening ceremony for Shanghai Expo in 2010.
Okay.
But, Expos are about every 4 years. It floats a little bit. And there are Class A exhibitions, which are bigger than Brisbane was an odd one. Brisbane should really have been a 3-month length expo because it wasn't a huge site. But for one reason and another, Brisbane was able to hold a 6-month expo. Shanghai was way bigger, about 7 times bigger.
Wow.
And Brisbane was followed in 92 in Spain. With an expo there. Then I lost touch with them a bit because I got busy with the Olympics. But the expos are a bit tricky to follow around the world because they're always different countries, different languages, different people.
Sure.
And Dubai had a big one scheduled for 2020. And then because of the pandemic, it was delayed till 2021. And I actually didn't even go to it, which is unusual because I do try and go to the big expos, and I'm sure it was terrific. All the reports I saw were great, but it was affected by the pandemic, and I think going on into the future, it's going to be really more and more difficult to hold big expos.
Yes, unfortunately, one of those many things that COVID has changed forever. Ric Birch, just finally, I believe this week you met with the Olympics, the 2032 Olympics organising committee that's been assembled so far. Is there anything you're able to share with us or divulge from that meeting, or is there any way that your influence will be felt in that event? Although, given you're going to be 87 at the time, so people should curb their expectations, I would imagine.
No, I think I'll be directing traffic by then. I'll be making sure the pedestrians find their seats. Oh, look, David, is that I try and keep in touch with the Olympic movement all around the world. It's quite a small family of people who are in the IOC and in the organising committees and who put the pitches together for the different cities. And, I know a number of them, and this was just a chance to say good day, and it was certainly not talking about job opportunities 9 years away, and who knows, A, whether I'll be alive, and B, whether I'll have any ideas left by then.
No, that is a fair call, and as expected. Actually, if I could just squeeze in one last question, Ric Birch. When you think back on it now, 35 years ago, and you've done a lot. But when you think back on that time, that 6 months of Expo '88 in Brisbane, what are the standout? What would one of the most standout memories be for you from that time? What comes to mind?
Well, Salou described it at the time as the happiest place on earth, and I think, for once that wasn't an exaggeration. My favourite memory actually is on opening ceremony night. We had an F-111 fighter bomber from RAF Amberley come overhead and do what they call a dump and burn, where they dump raw fuel into the afterburner, and it leaves a very satisfactory trail of fire through the sky, about 50 to 100 feet long. And I was sitting with a very good friend of mine who was working with Channel 9 at the time, and he was facing the direction the plane came from, and his mouth opened so wide that food fell out of it as the plane came towards him. He'd never seen anything like it and thought it was the end of the world.
Gee, as reactions go to something you've arranged, that's got to be up there.
Indeed. Yes, I hope the rest of the audience didn't lose their lunch.
No, you pity the cleaners, but it would have been quite a sight. Ric Birch, such a pleasure to have a chat to you and reminisce. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your time in our part of the world.
Thanks very much, David. Great to talk to you.
Thank you. All the very best.